Hello, New Covenant Parish. Good to be with you today as we look at another reading from this week's lectionary. The psalm reading this week is from Psalm 90, 1 through 6, and then 13 through 17. And the first thing we need to notice about this psalm is the superscription to it, which identifies it as a prayer of Moses, the man of God. In the whole Psalter, this is the only one attributed to Moses. And if you're looking for a real close connection to Moses' ministry, as recorded in the books of the law, the Torah, think back to Exodus 32, the golden calf story. We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. You might remember Moses on the mountain getting the law says to God, turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. And you'll compare that to verse 13 in this psalm, where he says, turn, O Lord, have compassion on your servants. So, that's our Moses for sure. He's a mediator between God and people. He does it all the time. But what this psalm really does powerfully is to establish an incredible contrast between God and humanity. As the psalm presents it, the power gap between us is almost beyond imagination. Moses works at it, but he really struggles to paint this picture. From the Psalm's opening verse, God is portrayed as so far beyond us in scope and scale that God is able to contain us. As the psalm says, God has been our dwelling place in all generations. God is our home. God is completely reliable, more enduring than the mountains, he says. The earth, the world, before time, through time, beyond time. That's God, our home, our dwelling place. The psalmist goes on to contrast God's immortality with our mortality. Kind of a sobering part of the psalm. But so not only did God exist before all creation, but at God's command, all creation, including us, may cease to exist. It's in verses 2 through 6. God has spoken a decisive command. Look in verse 3 when he says, turn back. Well, turn back to what? Well, to dust. Turn back to non-being. Turn back to oblivion, to earth, to dust, to ashes. See, this is a powerful acknowledgement that reflects on the God-given reality of death. It's understanding that the temporary, fragile quality of all human life is willed by God. And those who are faithful to God accept this reality and live out their days in complete trust and confidence that God will be, in some way or another, in the end, forever, a dwelling place for us, our dwelling place. And look closely at verses 4 through 6, what he writes there. Notice how the psalmist seeks a deeper understanding of God's command to turn back. See, God's sense of time is so different from ours. It makes us change the way we think about time and our relation to it. And when we think about it, length of time does not matter at all to the significance or quality of human life. Moses really gets into this. He says, human life, by God's design, is just so fleeting. It's like a dream. Moses says you're not sure it had any reality sometimes. It's like grass, it has no staying power at all. The message the psalmist wants us to hear is that we shouldn't cling with all of our might to this kind of life, but cling instead to the Lord of life. The Lord of life, unlike us, is the Lord of time and Lord of all time, beyond time. God is our only source of human hope because there is no lasting hope in the things of this world. Because the things of this world just don't last. That's the message of the first 6 verses. The middle section of the psalm is not addressed in our reading, but in response to the first 6, look at how it picks up when you read it in verse 13. The psalmist is still exploring the difference between divine power and human power, but now he starts to do it with a series of urgent prayer requests. The psalmist cries out, turn, O Lord. How long? Have compassion on your servants. The recognition of the fragile, fleeting nature of life inspires the psalmist to cry out to God for what he needs and desires most. Have compassion. Satisfy us with your steadfast love. Make us glad. Manifest your work and your power. Show us favor. Prosper our work. Oh, prosper our work. In other words, the psalmist is asking for things from God that will endure. He's making appeals to God for his compassion, for his forgiveness, mercy, his generosity, steadfast love. See, those are things that physical death can never rob us of, can never take from us. I'm thinking those are qualities of God's life that Moses had felt touching him through all the years of faithful service to the Lord. And the first reading of our lectionary this week, the one we did last time, tells us that Moses spent his last hours of life up on a mountain with God, looking out over the promised land. And look, I think it would be good for us to imagine him praying to God up there, praying this psalm, his psalm, on top of that mountain. And since the pronouns in the psalm are plural, and Moses loved to intercede for God's people, I like to think he was including us in his prayers, praying for the time we too might have the faith to face our own mortality with the promise of God's protection, however that might come to us. The dwelling place Moses speaks of at the beginning of his psalm can also be translated refuge, and also as God's steadfast love. So in verse 14 he prays, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. So that's a good thought to carry with us through every day of our time-bound, limited lives in this world. Holding on to faith and hope that there's more to come. By God's grace and by God's grace alone, there's more to come. It's the word of the Lord. Good to be with you. God bless you, my friends. See you next time.